The morning sky on Kepler 442b turned silver as death fell from the stars. Jinho pressed his face against the cold metal of the mining station's window and watched the alien ships descend like giant teardrops made of crystal and light. He had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. "Get away from there." Captain Park Min-ho grabbed Jinho's shoulder and pulled him back. "All soldiers to positions, this is not a drill." Jinho ran to his post, his hands shaking as he picked up his rifle. He was only 19 years old and had been stationed on this remote mining colony for just 3 months. The weapon felt heavy in his young hands. Around him, the other human soldiers moved with practiced speed, but Jinho could see the fear in their eyes too. The alien ships landed without a sound. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built, smooth and gleaming like they were carved from a single piece of silver glass. No doors opened, no ramps came down. Instead, the aliens simply walked through the solid walls of their ships, like they were made of water. "Open fire!" Captain Min-ho shouted. The humans fired their weapons, bright flashes lighting up the morning air. But their bullets and energy beams hit something invisible around the aliens and disappeared like raindrops, hitting a window. The aliens did not even slow down. Jinho had studied the reports about these creatures during his training. The Vexari Empire had been moving across the galaxy for hundreds of years, taking over world after world. They were tall and thin, with skin that changed colors like oil on water. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their eyes were large and black like pools of ink. But knowing about them from reports was different from seeing them in real life. The aliens moved with smooth, flowing steps that seemed to dance rather than walk. Their weapons were not guns, but long staffs that fired beams of pure light. When those beams hit a human soldier, the person simply fell down and did not get up again. The battle lasted only 20 minutes. Jinho found himself kneeling in the main plaza of the colony with the other survivors. His uniform was torn, and blood ran down his face from a cut on his forehead. But he kept his head up and his back straight. His grandfather had taught him that a man should face his problems with dignity, even when those problems seemed impossible to solve. Captain Min-ho was still alive, kneeling a few meters away. So was Corporal Kim Yuna, a tough woman from Seoul who had always been kind to Jinho even though he was the youngest in their unit. Sergeant Han Wubin was there too, his usually cheerful face now hard and angry. The aliens stood around them in a circle, their weapons ready. But they did not speak. They seemed to be waiting for something. Then she came. The alien queen was taller than the others, and her skin shifted between deep purple and bright gold. She had 6 arms instead of 4, and each arm wore bands of silver metal that caught the light. Her head was crowned with something that looked like crystal thorns, and when she walked, the other aliens moved out of her way without being told. She moved slowly around the circle of human prisoners, looking at each one carefully. Her large, black eyes seemed to see everything. When she stopped in front of Captain Min-ho, the older soldier straightened his shoulders and met her gaze. "I am Captain Park Min-ho of the Earth Defense Force," he said in a clear, strong voice. "These are my soldiers. Under the Galactic War Code, we demand to be treated as prisoners of war." The alien queen tilted her head to one side like a bird studying a strange insect. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on crystal bells, but the words came out in perfect Korean. "Your codes mean nothing here, human. You are in Vexari space now. You belong to the Empire." She continued walking around the circle. When she reached Jinho, she stopped. Her black eyes studied his face for a long moment. Jinho felt like she was looking inside his head, reading his thoughts and memories. He wanted to look away, but something inside him refused to show fear. The queen raised one of her 6 arms and pointed directly at him. "That human will be mine," she said. The words fell into the plaza like stones into still water. The other aliens looked surprised. Captain Min-ho started to stand up. "No," he shouted. "He's just a boy. Take me instead." One of the alien soldiers raised his light staff and fired a beam at Captain Min-ho. The captain fell to the ground and did not move. Yuna screamed. Wubin cursed in words that would have made their sergeant major proud. Jinho stared at his captain's still body and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Captain Minho had been a good man, a fair leader who cared about his soldiers. He had a wife and 2 children back on Earth. Now he was dead because he had tried to protect Jinho. 2 alien soldiers grabbed Jinho's arms and pulled him to his feet. He did not resist. There was no point. But as they dragged him toward the Queen ship, he turned his head to look at the other survivors one more time. "I will remember," he said quietly, speaking to Yuna and Wubin and all the others. "I will remember all of you." The inside of the alien ship was like being inside a jewel. The walls were smooth and curved, and they glowed with soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Jinho was put in a small room with walls he could see through but could not touch. The walls felt solid when he pushed against them, but they looked like they were made of air. As the ship lifted off from the colony, Jinho pressed his hands against the clear wall and watched his home disappear below him. He thought about Captain Minho lying still in the plaza. He thought about his parents back on Earth who would never know what happened to their son. He thought about the alien queen's strange words and the way she had looked at him. He did not understand why she had chosen him. He was not the strongest soldier or the smartest. He was not a leader like Captain Minho or a fighter like Sergeant Wubin. He was just a young man from a small farming town who had joined the defense force because he wanted to see the stars. But as the ship carried him away from everything he had ever known, Jinho made a promise to himself. He would survive whatever came next. He would find a way to make these aliens pay for what they had done. And someday, somehow, he would go home. The stars outside the ship looked cold and distant, but Jinho did not feel afraid anymore. He felt something else, something that burned in his chest like a small flame that could not be put out. He felt angry. And for humans, anger could be the most dangerous thing in the universe. 3 months had passed since the day Jinho's world ended, and now he stood in sand that was red with blood that was not all his own. Above him, thousands of aliens cheered and screamed in a language that sounded like singing glass. The Grand Colosseum of Vex Prime stretched up into the artificial sky, its walls carved from black stone that seemed to drink in light. Jinho wiped sweat and dirt from his eyes and looked at the body of the creature he had just killed. It had been twice his size with arms like tree trunks and claws that could cut through metal. The other fighters called it a chromax, and they had said it was impossible for a human to defeat one. They had been wrong. The crowd's cheering grew louder as servants came to drag the dead creature away. Jinho did not celebrate. He simply walked back toward the tunnel that led to the fighters' quarters, his legs steady despite the exhaustion that made his whole body ache. In the tunnel, other fighters watched him pass. Most were aliens from worlds the Vexari had conquered over the centuries. There were the blue-skinned Altarians with their 4 eyes and sharp teeth. There were Gorvaxians that looked like walking rocks covered in moss. There were creatures that seemed to be made of living metal and others that looked like giant insects. All of them had learned to fear the small human who kept winning fights he should lose. Jinho. He turned to see Kim Yuna running toward him. She worked in the kitchens now, serving food to the fighters and the guards. Her face was thinner than it had been back on the colony, but her eyes still held the same strength that had made her a good soldier. "Are you hurt?" she asked, looking him over for injuries. "I am fine," he said. It was not completely true. His left shoulder ached from where the chromax had grabbed him, and there were new cuts on his arms to join the scars from previous fights. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. "The others are asking about you," Yuna said quietly, glancing around to make sure no guards were listening. "The humans from the other ships. They want to know how you keep winning." Jinho knew about the other humans. Over the past months, he had seen them in the Colosseum crowds, prisoners like himself who had been taken from human colonies and ships across this part of the galaxy. Some worked as servants like Yuna. Others labored in the factories and power plants that kept the great city running. "I learn," he said simply. "Each fight, I watch. I learn how they move, how they think. Humans are good at learning." It was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that every time he stepped into the arena, he remembered Captain Minho falling in the plaza. He remembered the alien queen pointing at him with one of her 6 arms. He remembered his promise to himself, and that promise gave him strength when his body wanted to give up. There is something else, Yuna said. Han Wubin is here. They brought him in yesterday with a group from the prison ships. He is working in the power plants. Jinho felt a spark of joy at hearing his old sergeant's name, but he kept his face calm. In this place, showing too much emotion could be dangerous. Can you get a message to him? He asked. Maybe. What do you want to say? Tell him I am alive. Tell him I remember our training. And tell him... Jinho paused, thinking carefully about his words. Tell him that humans do not break. We bend, but we do not break. Yuna nodded and hurried away. Jinho continued to his cell, a small room with walls that glowed with soft light. The room was comfortable enough, with a bed and a place to wash and food that appeared when he was hungry. The alien queen made sure her personal fighter was well cared for. That night, as he did every night, the queen came to visit him. She entered through the wall like it was made of air, her skin shifting between silver and deep blue in the dim light. She had changed since that first day. She no longer wore the crystal crown or the silver bands on her arms. She looked almost, simple. Almost like a normal person, if a person could have 6 arms and eyes like black pools. You fought well today, she said, settling onto a chair that grew from the floor when she needed it. I fought to stay alive, Jinho replied. He no longer stood when she entered. Over the months, their conversations had become less formal, though he was still her prisoner. The Chromax was trained to kill humans specifically, the queen said. Its handlers studied recordings of human anatomy and fighting styles. They were confident it would end your winning streak. Jinho looked at her carefully. You sound disappointed that it failed. I am curious, she said. Every species we have conquered has patterns. When they are pushed beyond their limits, they break in predictable ways. But humans... She tilted her head in that bird-like way he had learned to recognize. Humans become more dangerous when they should become weaker. Maybe that is because we fight for different reasons than other species, Jinho said. What do you fight for? The question hung in the air between them. Jinho thought about Captain Minho and his family back on Earth. He thought about Yuna and Wubin and all the other humans trapped in this alien city. He thought about his promise to go home someday. We fight because we have to, he said finally. Because someone has to remember the people who cannot fight anymore. The queen stared at him with those deep black eyes. In the months of these nightly visits, she had asked him hundreds of questions about humans and Earth, and why his people did the things they did. At first, he had thought she was trying to find weaknesses to exploit. Now he was not so sure. Your people puzzle me, she said. We have conquered 47 worlds in this galaxy. Every species eventually accepts their place in the Empire. They find peace in knowing their role and not having to struggle anymore. But humans, she paused. Even your children fight us. Even your elderly. Even when victory is impossible, you resist. Maybe that is because you do not understand what victory means to humans, Jinho said. Before the queen could ask what he meant, a loud sound echoed through the Colosseum complex. It was an alarm, high and piercing. The queen stood quickly, her skin flickering between colors like a warning light. What is happening? Jinho asked. The queen placed one hand against the wall, and her eyes unfocused as if she was listening to voices only she could hear. When she looked at him again, there was something new in her expression, something that might have been respect. There has been an incident in the power plant, she said. Some of the human workers have sabotaged important equipment. My engineers say it will take days to repair. Jinho kept his face blank, but inside he felt a fierce pride. Wubin had gotten his message. The old sergeant was still fighting, still being a soldier even in this terrible place. Accidents happen, Jinho said carefully. Do they? The queen studied him for a long moment. This is the 5th accident this month, all in facilities where humans work. My security forces are beginning to think these accidents are not accidents at all. She moved toward the wall, preparing to leave. But at the last moment she turned back to him. Tomorrow you will fight a Gorvaxian champion. It has never been defeated. My nobles expect it to kill you, to finally end the hope that watching you win gives to the other human prisoners. Her skin shifted to a color he had never seen before, something between gold and green. Do not disappoint me, Li Jinho. After she left, Jinho lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring another fight, another chance to die. But tonight, somewhere in this alien city, his fellow humans were fighting back in their own way. They were proving that the Queen was wrong about one thing. Humans did not find peace in accepting their place. Humans found strength in refusing to know their place at all. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the great city settling into sleep. But Jinho smiled in the darkness because he knew that somewhere out there, other humans were still awake, still planning, still refusing to surrender. The war was not over. It was just beginning. The rumor spread through the slave quarters like fire through dry grass. The human in the Colosseum could not be killed. From the crystal spires where human servants polished alien furniture, to the deep tunnels where human miners dug for precious stones. The same whispered words passed from person to person in a dozen human languages. Li Jinho was still alive. Li Jinho was still fighting, and every day he lived was proof that humans could survive anything. Kim Yuna moved through the kitchen preparing the evening meal, but her mind was on other things. In the 3 weeks since Han Wubin had sabotaged the power plant, small acts of rebellion had begun happening all over the city. A food shipment would arrive spoiled. A transport would break down at just the wrong moment. Computer systems would develop mysterious glitches that took days to fix. The aliens were starting to notice. Yuna, whispered a voice behind her. She turned to see Choi Hyun-woo, a thin man who had been an engineer before the Vexari captured his ship. He worked in the power plants now, keeping the city's energy systems running. We need to talk. They met later in a storage room deep in the kitchen complex where the walls were thick and the alien listening devices could not reach. With them were Dr. Shin Nayeon, who worked in the medical centers, and Lieutenant Kang Tai-hyun, a pilot who maintained the alien ships in the great hangars above the city. It is working, Hyun-woo said quietly. The small breakdowns, the delays, the aliens are having to assign more guards to watch us. They are having to check and double-check everything we do. We are making them afraid. But we need to be careful, Dr. Nayeon warned. They are starting to ask questions. Some of the guards have been questioning humans who work in areas where accidents happen. Lieutenant Taehyun nodded grimly. I overheard 2 alien officers talking yesterday. They think the incidents are connected. They know we are organizing somehow. Yuna looked at each of them in turn. These were good people, brave people, who had found ways to fight back even in this impossible situation. But they were still just a handful of humans in a city of millions of aliens. How many of us are there now? She asked. Maybe 200 who are actively helping, Hyun-woo said. But there are thousands more who know something is happening. Humans from ships that were captured months or even years ago. Some of them had given up hope, but now they see Jinho winning in the arena every week, Yuna finished. They remember that humans do not surrender. It was true. Every victory in the Colosseum sent waves of excitement through the human population. The aliens had meant for the fights to be entertainment, a way to show their superiority over the species they conquered. Instead, they had given the humans a symbol of resistance that grew stronger with every passing day. What about the other species? Dr. Nayeon asked. The ones who were conquered before us? Taehyun smiled grimly. That is the interesting part. Some of them are starting to help us. The Altarians in the communication centers have been accidentally delaying messages between different parts of the city. A few Gorvaxians in the construction crews have been building things wrong, so they have to be torn down and rebuilt. They see what we are doing, Yuna said, understanding. They see that it is possible to fight back. The next morning, Yuna received a message from one of the guards who brought food to the Colosseum fighters. Jinho wanted to speak with her urgently. She made an excuse about needing to check the quality of meat being delivered to the arena and hurried to the tunnel complex beneath the great fighting pit. She found Jinho in his cell, pacing like a caged animal. The months of fighting had changed him. He was thinner but stronger, with new scars on his arms and face. His eyes held a hardness that had not been there when he was just a young soldier on the mining colony. "Something is going to happen," he said as soon as she entered. "The Queen told me yesterday. There will be a special event in 5 days. The anniversary of the founding of the Vixari Empire. Nobles from all over the galaxy will come to watch the fights." "What kind of special event?" Yuna asked. "A battle royale. 20 fighters, all fighting at once until only one is left alive." Jinho's jaw tightened. "She said it will be my greatest test. She said if I survive, I will have earned something special." Yuna felt cold fear settle in her stomach. "Jinho, 20 fighters. Even for you, that might be impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but that is not the important part. The important part is that for one day, every important alien in the Empire will be in the Colosseum. The security will be focused on protecting them, not on watching the slaves." Understanding dawned in Yuna's mind. "You want us to use the distraction. I want you to be ready," Jinho said. "If something happens during the fight, if there is chaos in the arena, that might be the best chance we will ever have to strike back in a big way." "What are you planning to do?" she asked. Jinho was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but determined. "I am going to do what humans do best. I am going to give them something they do not expect." Over the next 5 days, the human resistance worked frantically to prepare. Hyunwoo and his team mapped out the power distribution systems for the entire Colosseum complex. Dr. Neon stockpiled medical supplies and identified the locations of alien communication centers. Taehyun used his access to the hangars to learn the security codes for several small ships. But the most important preparation happened in the deepest tunnels beneath the city, where Han Wubin had been quietly gathering allies among the other prisoners. Word had spread to humans throughout the complex. On the day of the great fight, be ready to act. The morning of the anniversary arrived with fanfare that could be heard throughout the city. Alien ships filled the sky, carrying noble families and military leaders from across the empire. The Colosseum filled with beings who had never seen a human fight and were curious about the strange creature that had become so famous. In his cell, Jinho prepared for what might be his last battle. He stretched his muscles and checked his equipment, the simple weapons and armor that arena fighters were allowed. But his real preparation was mental, remembering everything he had learned about his own species during these long months of captivity. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest, but they had one advantage that no other species seemed to understand. They fought differently when they had something to lose. The other 19 fighters, gathered in the preparation area, were all champions from their own worlds. There was a Chromax even bigger than the one he had killed months ago. There was an Altarian assassin whose forearms moved like striking snakes. There was a creature made of living crystal that could cut through steel with its razor-sharp limbs. They all looked at him with contempt or pity. The small human who had gotten lucky a few times but would surely die when faced with real competition. As the gates opened and the fighters walked into the arena, Jinho heard something that made his heart leap with fierce joy. From the slave sections of the Colosseum, thousands of voices were chanting his name. Not just humans, but aliens too. Species that had been conquered by the Vexari decades ago, who had forgotten what it meant to resist until they watched a young human refuse to give up. The crowd of nobles fell silent as the chanting grew louder. This was not supposed to happen. The conquered were supposed to be quiet and grateful for the entertainment provided by their betters. Queen Lyrith stood in her royal box, her skin shifting through colors that showed her confusion and growing anger. She raised one arm and the chanting stopped as if cut by a knife. But Jinho could see something in the faces of the enslaved beings around the arena, something that had not been there before. Hope. The battle began with a sound like thunder, as 20 deadly fighters crashed together in the center of the arena. Jinho moved differently than the others, not trying to win quickly but simply trying to stay alive while the larger, stronger fighters eliminated each other. But as the minutes passed and bodies began to fall, Jinho did something that shocked everyone watching. When the crystal creature cornered a wounded Altarian and prepared to deliver a killing blow, Jinho intervened. He attacked the crystal being from behind, allowing the injured fighter to escape. The crowd of nobles buzzed with confusion. Why would a fighter save his competition? It made no tactical sense. But in the slave sections, the chanting began again, louder than before. Because they understood what the nobles did not. Jinho was not just fighting to win. He was fighting to show everyone watching what humans believed in. He was fighting to prove that mercy could be a weapon more powerful than any blade. The riot began when Jinho refused to kill the young Altarian fighter who had surrendered to him in the final moments of the battle royale. The alien had fallen to his knees, his forearms raised in the universal gesture of defeat, and instead of striking the killing blow, Jinho had helped him to his feet. The crowd of enslaved beings erupted. Thousands of voices from dozens of species rose in a sound that was part cheer, part war cry, and part song of freedom that had been forgotten for too long. The noble aliens in their fancy boxes sat frozen in shock as their perfectly controlled entertainment became something wild and dangerous. Security forces rushed into the arena, but it was too late. The uprising spread through the Colosseum like wildfire, jumping from tree to tree. Slaves overpowered guards, prisoners broke free from their holding areas, and for the first time in the history of the Vexari Empire, the conquered were fighting, back in the heart of the capital city. In the confusion, Jinho disappeared into the tunnels beneath the arena, following passages that Kim Yuna had mapped out weeks before. Behind him, the sounds of battle echoed through the ancient stone corridors as centuries of oppression exploded into violence. But the real battle was happening in the royal tower, where Queen Lyrith stood in her private chambers watching her empire begin to crack. The room around her was filled with strange objects that her servants had brought from 100 conquered worlds. But in the past months, one type of object had begun to dominate the collection. Books with pages made of paper, music stored on primitive discs, paintings created with colored pigments on cloth, art forms that seemed crude compared to Vexari technology, but somehow carried more emotional power than anything her own people had ever created. Human artifacts. She had been studying them obsessively, trying to understand the species that had turned her perfect empire upside down. My queen. One of her generals entered through the wall, his skin flickering with the orange patterns that meant urgent danger. The riots are spreading beyond the Colosseum. Slave populations in 7 districts have begun to rebel. Our forces are having difficulty containing them. How many casualties? She asked, not turning from the window where she could see fires beginning to burn in the lower city. Among our forces, minimal so far. But my queen, that is the problem. The rebels are not trying to kill us. They are trying to disable our equipment, block our communications, disrupt our operations. It is as if they want to paralyze the city rather than destroy it. Lyrith nodded slowly. It was a human strategy, she realized. They were not fighting to win a war they could not win. They were fighting to prove that the war was not over. Bring me the human fighter, she commanded. Bring him here alone and tell no one. An hour later, Jinho stood in the queen's private chambers, no longer wearing the simple clothes of an arena fighter, but dressed in clean robes that had been provided by her servants. He was dirty and tired from the fighting in the tunnels, but his eyes were alert and unafraid. You started this, Lyrith said, gesturing toward the window where the sounds of conflict could still be heard. No, Jinho replied calmly. You started this when you decided my people were things to be owned instead of beings to be respected. The queen studied him for a long moment. In the months since she had first seen him kneeling in that mining colony plaza, he had changed from a frightened boy into something much more dangerous. He had become a symbol, a living reminder that some spirits could not be broken no matter how much force was applied to them. Sit, she said, indicating a chair that grew from the floor. We need to talk. For the first time since his capture, Jinho sat in the presence of the alien queen without being commanded to do so. The gesture was small, but it represented a fundamental shift in their relationship. They were no longer captor and prisoner. They were two leaders trying to find a way forward. "Tell me about your homeworld," the queen said. Jinho was surprised by the question. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How your people live. How you govern yourselves. How you resolve conflicts." Her skin shifted to colors he had never seen before, patterns that seemed to represent deep thought. How you maintain hope when hope should be impossible. So Jinho talked. He told her about Earth, about cities and farms and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. He told her about human governments that were messy and inefficient, but somehow worked because people chose to make them work. He told her about wars between human nations that ended not with the complete destruction of the loser, but with treaties, and rebuilding and former enemies becoming allies. "Your species fascinates me," the queen said when he finished. "Every other race we have encountered follows predictable patterns. The strong dominate the weak. The conquered submit to the conquerors. Order emerges from the application of superior force." She stood and walked to a wall display showing a map of the galaxy. "But humans, you make strength from weakness. You create order from chaos. You turn defeat into victory by refusing to accept that victory and defeat have meaning. Maybe that is because we learned something other species have not," Jinho said. "What?" "That. There is a difference between being powerful and being strong." The queen turned to look at him, her black eyes reflecting the soft light of the room. "Explain." "Power is the ability to force others to do what you want," Jinho said. "Strength is the ability to do what is right even when it is difficult. Your empire has great power, but my people have strength, and you believe strength will defeat power?" "I believe strength will outlast power," Jinho corrected, "because power depends on others being afraid. But once people stop being afraid, power has nothing left." The queen was quiet for a long time, processing his words. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "There is something I must tell you. Something about why the Vexari Empire exists, why we conquer other worlds." She moved to another part of the room, where a holographic display showed complex genetic patterns. "We are dying, Li Jinho. Not as individuals, but as a species. We lost the ability to reproduce naturally over 1,000 years ago. We survive only through advanced technology, but that technology is failing." Jinho felt a chill of understanding. "You are looking for a genetic solution. That is why you take prisoners from so many different species. We have been searching for compatible genetic material that could help us restore our reproductive capabilities," she confirmed. "We have tested samples from every species we have conquered. All have failed." She paused, her skin shifting to colors that seemed to represent sadness. "Except one. Humans," Jinho said quietly. "Humans. Your genetic structure is compatible with ours in ways we do not fully understand. With human help, we could save our species from extinction." The queen looked directly at him. "But it would require voluntary cooperation, not forced participation. The process only works when both parties choose to participate freely." The implications hit Jinho like a physical blow. The Vexari had the power to take what they wanted from any species, but from humans they needed something that could not be taken by force. They needed consent. "That is why you kept me alive," he said. "Not as a fighter or a symbol, but as a test. You wanted to see if humans could be convinced to help you willingly." "Yes," the queen admitted. "But the test revealed something I did not expect. In trying to understand humans well enough to convince them to help us, I learned that we have been wrong about everything. We thought conquest was the only path to survival. But you have shown me another way." She walked to the window and looked out at the city where the fires of rebellion were slowly being controlled by her security forces. But Jinho could see that the real battle was happening in her mind, a war between everything she had been taught and everything she had learned. "I offer you a choice, Li Jinho," she said finally. I will free all human prisoners and give your people a world of their own within our territory. In return, I ask for something that cannot be commanded. I ask that your people consider helping mine survive. Not as slaves or subjects, but as partners in something new. Jinho stood and joined her at the window. Below them, the great city stretched into the distance, a monument to the power of the Vexari Empire. But he could see the cracks, now the places where the foundation was beginning to shift. I cannot make that choice for my people, he said, but I can tell you how humans make such choices. How? Together, as equals, with full knowledge of what is being asked and why. He looked at her directly, meeting those deep black eyes without fear. If you truly want our help, you will have to do something no conqueror in the history of your empire has ever done. What is that? You will have to ask. 1 year later, Jinho stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that had once been Queen Lyreth's personal fortress, and watched the impossible become routine. Below him, the surface of Vex Prime bustled with activity that would have been unthinkable just months before. Humans and Vexari worked side by side in laboratories and factories, their combined knowledge creating technologies that neither species could have developed alone. The transformation had not been easy or quick. After the riots in the Colosseum, it had taken weeks of careful negotiation before the first human prisoners agreed to meet with Vexari leaders as equals rather than captives. Many humans had been suspicious, certain it was another trap or trick. Many Vexari had been angry, unable to accept that their empire's survival might depend on cooperation with a species they had considered inferior. But slowly, carefully, trust had begun to grow. Kim Yuna walked up behind him, her footsteps quiet on the metal deck. She wore the blue uniform of the Integrated Security Force, with insignia that marked her as a general. The woman who had once served food to alien guards now commanded mixed units of humans and Vexari, protecting the new alliance from external threats. The morning reports, she said, handing him a data pad. Dr. Nayan's medical team has made another breakthrough in the reproductive research, and Lieutenant Taehyun says the first batch of hybrid ships will be ready for testing next week. Jinho scanned the reports with satisfaction. Dr. Shin Nayan had become the head of the Joint Medical Program, leading teams of human and Vexari scientists in work that was producing remarkable results. Not only were they close to solving the Vexari reproductive crisis, but they had discovered that human-Vexari collaboration could enhance both species in unexpected ways. Lieutenant Kang Tae-hyun had taken over the spacecraft development program, designing ships that combined human adaptability with Vexari energy technology. The first prototype had performance capabilities that exceeded anything either species had built separately. What about the external situation? Jinho asked. Yuna's expression grew more serious. 3 more systems have petitioned to join the alliance. But the hegemony is mobilizing fleets along our border. They are not happy about what we represent. The hegemony was an alliance of older galactic powers that had maintained stability through traditional methods of conquest and domination. The human-Vexari partnership threatened their entire worldview. The idea that former enemies could become stronger through cooperation was dangerous to empires built on the principle that strength came only through subjugation. Any word from Earth? Jinho asked. Ambassador Chen's latest message arrived this morning. The Earth government has agreed to send another 1,000 volunteers for the cultural exchange program. They are very interested in Vexari medical technology, especially the life extension treatments. Jinho nodded. The relationship with Earth had been complicated at first. Many humans back home had been angry about the colonies that had been attacked and the people who had been taken prisoner. But when they learned about the alliance and the benefits it offered to both species, opinion had gradually shifted toward support. Jinho. A familiar voice spoke behind him. He turned to see Lyra approaching, her skin showing the calm blue-green, patterns that had become her normal coloration since stepping down from absolute rule. She no longer called herself Queen Lyreth. The title and the formal name belonged to the old empire, the system of domination that had nearly destroyed both their species. Now she was simply Lyra, co-leader of an alliance that was writing new rules for how different species could coexist. The council is ready for the morning session, she said. We have several important issues to discuss. The council chamber was a marvel of integrated architecture, with sections designed for both human and Vexari comfort. Representatives from both species sat together around a circular table, discussing issues with the easy familiarity of people who had learned to trust each other's judgment. Han Wubin was there, representing the human technical workers who had become essential to the Alliance's infrastructure. Choi Hyunwoo sat beside a Vexari engineer, their heads bent together over plans for a new power distribution system. The integration had become so complete that it was sometimes difficult to tell where human ideas ended and Vexari innovation began. First item, Lyra announced as the session began, the birth announcement. A cheer went up around the table as Dr. Naon stood to deliver her report. At 0347 this morning, the first human Vexari hybrid children were born. 3 healthy infants, each carrying genetic material from both species. Early scans show that they have inherited beneficial traits from both parents, while avoiding the reproductive problems that have plagued the Vexari for centuries. The implications were staggering. Not only would these children be able to reproduce naturally, but they represented something entirely new in the galaxy. A truly integrated species that embodied the best of both human adaptability and Vexari longevity. This is what we have worked toward, Jinho said, looking around the table at faces that had once been enemies and were now family, proof that cooperation creates possibilities that conquest never could. But even as they celebrated, alerts began flashing on the chamber's communication screens. Yuna quickly accessed the incoming messages, her face growing grim as she read. "What is it?" Lyra asked. "Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching from the galactic core," Yuna reported. "Unknown configuration, but the energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. They will reach our outer system in approximately 6 standard days." The celebration died as the implications sank in. The Alliance had been preparing for conflict with the hegemony, but this was something different, something potentially much more dangerous. "Orders?" asked Han Wubin, falling back into the military patterns that had served him well during the rebellion. Jinho stood and walked to the chamber's main display, where a tactical map showed the approaching threat. The unknown fleet was enormous, larger than anything the hegemony had ever assembled. But he found himself thinking not about the size of the threat, but about the resources they had built together to meet it. "We do what humans and Vexari do best when we work together," he said. "We adapt, we innovate, and we prove that the galaxy has room for something better than conquest." He turned to face the council, seeing determination in every face around the table. Human and Vexari, former enemies who had become something stronger than either species alone. "Send messages to every world that has joined the Alliance," he ordered. "Tell them what is coming, but also tell them what we have accomplished together in just 1 year. Tell them that we have children being born who carry the best of both species. Tell them that we have built something worth defending." "And if this unknown fleet comes in peace?" Lyra asked. "Then we welcome them as we welcomed each other," Jinho replied. "We show them that there is another way to live among the stars. And if they come as conquerors?" Jinho looked out through the chamber's viewport at the bustling activity below, where humans and Vexari continued their work together, building a future that neither species could have imagined alone. "Then they will learn what the Vexari Empire learned," he said quietly. "That some things cannot be conquered. Some things can only be chosen freely, as gifts given between equals." As the council dispersed to prepare for whatever was coming, Jinho remained at the viewport, watching his adopted world prepare for its greatest test. In the distance, he could see the converted Colosseum that now served as a cultural center, where human and Vexari children learned together, and former slaves taught classes on cooperation and conflict resolution. The boy who had been captured on a remote mining colony had become a man who helped forge an alliance between species. But the most important lesson he had learned remained the same one his grandfather had taught him back on Earth. A person should face their problems with dignity, no matter how impossible those problems seemed to solve. The unknown fleet was coming. The galaxy was about to change again, But for the first time in his life, Jinho was not facing the future alone. He had family now, spread across 2 species and countless worlds, all of them bound together by the most powerful force in the universe, the choice to hope for something better. In the growing twilight of the alien sky, lights began to come on, across the great city below. Human lights and Vexari lights, shining together in patterns that had never existed before, and proving that even in the vast darkness between the stars, cooperation could kindle flames that no amount of force could ever extinguish. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to write together.